We already know that the KTM 990 RCR is fast on track. We also already know that it is properly good fun on the road. But what is it like in everyday life? Is it a motorcycle you can actually live with, or one you just suffer through? In this video, we are focusing much more on the everyday qualities of the KTM 990 RCR, because over the last few weeks I have really been using it a lot. We went shopping, we went out for food, and that means I now really do know what it is like to live with this motorcycle day after day. And we are starting with the first point, the absolute highlight on this bike, and that is the display. On the RCR, KTM uses a new 8.8-inch color TFT display, which is also used on the 990 Duke R. On the Duke R, to be honest, it feels a bit too big to me because it sits so close to the rider. But here the display is integrated deep into the fairing, and in this bike it works really well. Of course, there is one drawback, and that is that if you want to use the touch display, you have to reach deeper into the fairing, and there is not exactly a lot of room there in the first place. But even so, the display itself is really well thought out and it works brilliantly. For everyday riding, my personal highlight was the integrated map navigation. You can search for destinations very easily, just like you would in Google Maps, and then you can find the right route without any fuss. The nice thing is that once I have set everything up and found my destination, I can arrange the touch display exactly the way I want it. Do I want more map? Do I want less map? In other words, with the touch functions, I can genuinely adapt the different elements so they suit exactly what I need visually at that moment, and that is a real plus in everyday use. With gloves on though, I do have to say it gets a bit clumsy, and then not every input is picked up perfectly. So I would recommend setting everything up before you start, then putting your gloves on, and then riding off. And naturally, if the goal is really to find twisty roads, I still always want to work with Kalimoto, because there I can put together my route exactly the way I want it. But the big advantage here is that I do not have to mount a phone somewhere on the bike. No, I can just use the whole thing directly in the display. And when it comes to getting properly from A to B, the system is genuinely very good. So yes, finding your destination is not a problem at all, but on any journey you also end up going through town sooner or later, and I did plenty of that as well. And that is exactly where it becomes clear that the RCR was not built for the city. Two things stood out to me more on the negative side. The first is the mirrors. When I sit on the bike, no matter how I adjust them, I never get a really good view to the rear. I always have to sort of look under my arm, simply because my arms are in the way. A lot of super sports bikes have that problem, and it definitely stood out to me on the RCR as well. But even more negative than that was the amount of heat. Between your legs you have the catalytic box, a big one, and it radiates a serious amount of heat. That means in city traffic, especially on the left leg, you start to feel a proper wave of heat after a very short time, and in the long run that is not going to make anybody very happy. Let us move on to the ergonomics. As you can see, I am 1.75 meters tall, and I can get both feet down on the ground properly, so at least the standstill situation is safe. But of course, who am I kidding? This is a super sports bike, which means it is never going to be the most comfortable thing in the world. It starts with the seat, and you can already see it from the side. It slopes quite clearly forward, so the motorcycle pushes me onto the tank and wants to bring me forward towards the bars. Perfect, of course, when you are heading for the racetrack. In everyday use though, it means that I often end up sitting very far forward here against the tank. And if you are male, be careful over manhole covers and speed bumps. Do not ask me how I know that. If we look further forward, the first thing is simply the look of it, and visually it is absolutely glorious. That low-mounted handlebar, the fairing, the switchgear, the fully adjustable suspension, it really is a dream to look at. And then when I lean forward into the riding position, I immediately notice that this is a serious motorcycle. It may not be perfect for day-to-day use, but you can make life easier for yourself if you have a lot of strength in your legs and your core, because then you can take a lot of the weight off your wrists and arms. Naturally, if you just sit there all day day long with the whole load resting on the bars. You feel it in your shoulders and your back, and that is not pleasant. So nobody's going to be surprised by this. The KTM 990 RCR is not the most comfortable motorcycle for everyday life. But with a bit of body tension and the right posture, you can definitely take some of the pressure out of it. And I do want to give it credit for that, because this is a real super sports bike and not some softened up road sport bike that only looks sporty but has nothing behind it. Where the 990 RCR then turned out to be surprisingly good for commuting was on the motorway. Here the ergonomics do not bother me nearly as much, because at a motorway speed of 120 to 130 kilometers per hour, I already have a certain amount of wind pressure on my chest, which means I can relax a bit. And of course, super sports bike means full fairing, and full fairing means in turn that we have a very stable motorcycle on the motorway. I cannot tell you exactly how much the whole aero package on this bike really helps with that. Up at the front there are those large wings, and there are aerodynamic elements underneath the bike as well, almost like in MotoGP. Whether that really helps stability at motorway speeds, I cannot say for certain, but one thing is clear. On the motorway you can cruise along in a very relaxed way. And of course it helps that this bike has cruise control as well, typical KTM. There are different packs you can buy, but in demo mode everything is unlocked. So here we have cruise control on board in a 120 horsepower super sports bike. I honestly would not have expected that, but it suits the bike surprisingly well. Because that way I can sit up a little more, take a little pressure off the bars, and what I almost have here is a surprisingly relaxed touring bike. The whole thing, together with the display I mentioned earlier, was what really surprised me most about this motorcycle on the motorway. Because honestly, at first we were joking that I could probably ride this all the way to the monkeys of Gibraltar, and in truth on the motorway the RCR is actually a bike you can live with. It genuinely holds up much better there than I would ever have expected from a machine that looks this uncompromising. But of course, everyday life and an everyday test also include riding on country roads. And even though Martin Bauer can describe that in far more detail than I can, I still want to talk about it, because naturally I also spent a lot of time riding it on some beautiful roads. And what can you say? KTM simply knows how to build a fun motorcycle. We have just over 120 horsepower on board here from this proper twin-cylinder engine. And in this bike, for the first time, I actually liked the sound of it. When you are on the overrun and when you shift down, the engine crackles a bit from the exhaust, and that is properly enjoyable, even though we are still running the standard exhaust system. And out on the road, yes, you are still stretched out over the bars, so you do have to ride it actively. Maybe you want to go a bit into a hang-off position in order to get the most out of the bike, but even then, everything feels very controlled. We also have various riding modes on board. There are 2 custom modes plus rain, road, sport and track. So there is a whole range of riding modes available, and you really can tailor the bike to suit the way you want it. But what you notice on the road above all is just how stable and controlled the motorcycle feels. You fire it out of a corner, the front wheel goes a little light, but it never feels as if I am just the passenger on board and the bike is doing its own thing. No, I am riding this motorcycle very clearly and very deliberately. KTM has done a nice job there with the setup, so in that respect there were no surprises for me at all. I already knew it was going to work really well on country roads. Naturally, when the road gets very tight and very twisty, you might be better off going for the naked bike instead. The 990 Duke R Martin Bauer also made a video about that over here in Spain. Because there you have a bit more freedom to steer the bike with the handlebar, whereas this motorcycle is clearly aimed more at faster radii and higher speeds. But even so, if you want a super sports bike, you can buy this one without hesitation, because this is exactly what it is made for on the road, and it is huge fun. And then there is one more point that is almost as important in everyday life as everything else, and that is the way it looks and the attention it gets. We have the RCR here in classic KTM orange, and let me put it this way, it really could not be any more conspicuous. You are basically traveling around on a fluorescent marker pen with 2 wheels. We rode through the city center of Barcelona, and we were also out on these country roads, and absolutely all eyes were on you. Just now, when we stopped here to film this piece to camera, 2 bikers came back who had already seen us earlier today, and they wanted to take a closer look straight away. They wanted to sit on it, they wanted to talk to us about this unusual motorcycle, and they were genuinely curious about it. So visually, I do not want to say too much about that because in the end, whether you like it or not is always in the eye of the beholder. But I can add one thing, and that is that on this still quite new machine, we already have the first stone chips, and they are clearly visible as well. That is naturally one downside of having such a smooth front fairing. So if you spend a lot of time on the motorway, you are going to notice that here fairly soon, and above all, you are going to see it. So then let us come to a conclusion, because now we also know how the 990 RCR performs in everyday life. It is obviously not the most logical everyday motorcycle. If you want to ride this engine, then fine, buy the Duke. If you want it to be sportier and you still want a naked bike, then the 990 Duke R is the far more logical choice. But even so, the RCR still surprised me in everyday use. Yes, in the city it is not ideal, the riding position is super sporty, and the heat coming from the exhaust is very noticeable as well, but on the motorway it really does play to its strengths. Stability, comfort and a genuinely clever display make long journeys surprisingly possible and surprisingly pleasant as well. So the 990 RCR is not the best everyday motorcycle, but if you only want one bike and it has to be a very sporty one from KTM, then you really do not have another option. And above all, if you choose it in this color, you are going to stand out. And it turns every day, every ride to work, every trip to university, wherever you may be going, into something a little bit special. Now it is your turn. What do you think of the KTM 990 RCR? Is there anything else you still want to see about this motorcycle? Then write it down for us in the comments. Of course, we also want to hear your opinion, so make sure you put all of that in writing as well. And then, right at the end, do not forget to subscribe to the channel so you do not miss any more of these videos. That means all I can do now is thank you very much for your attention. We will see you again in the next video. Thanks for watching, bye and take care.